Well, I just wanted to share this morning something that I was talking about. I've talked about in the past, but it actually relates to another area. So we're asking about whether, what is missing for people. And in this case, my thoughts were, well, it's actually a pastor of the Christian Reformed Church. And I've been watching because over the last couple of years, they've been arguing about uh, the affirmation debate, right? Is Christianity able to embrace a homosexual and their lifestyle, or just the homosexual? Or do they think that everything within that relationship is debauchery? Right. But this has nothing to do with that actual discussion. This has to do with the meaning in religion. So they're arguing about whether, and the title of the video is Sacramentalists and Confessionalists Better with Christian Americanism Than Mega Church Gurus. He does weird titles because they are interesting. They get you to click. And what struck me is there is a common argument over, right, mega church gurus. And I find it funny because I actually watch um, a pastor who's considered a mega church, and they really aren't. They just happen to be, popular. Right? They're not that big. In fact, he's not much bigger than the Catholic Church up the street, and no one would call them a mega church. So I find it's just term wars, right? And a lot of jealousy, or as what Jung would say, what you hate in others is usually what you hate in yourself. Ran into that today in Discord. People just take what you say however they want to take it, no matter how many times you tell them. Like this one kid just got totally upset over something we were talking about and just went down this whole road of ad hominem attacks. And he even went so far as to, go online and try to search me up online. He got in a lot of trouble for that. But he was mostly upset because he didn't bother me, right? Because I've gone through this before. Remember, about a year ago, somebody must have taken something wrong and they left a nasty review, right? So my podcast went from 4.8 out of 5 stars and glowing reviews from who bothered, because I don't share the podcast at all. Never have. And by the way, if anyone's doing a podcast, don't do that, right? Because now I'm subject to only the annoying people, the annoyed people, sorry. Like I've seen with most reviews, right? If you do a good job, no one's leaving you a review. If you do a bad job, oh boy, are they going to leave a review. And they're going to keep leaving reviews for years, right? It's just the way it is. And why? Because we're the arbiter of meaning. We choose how to take things, right? It doesn't matter how something's said. If you choose to take it negatively, wrong, as an insult, right? And so for me, when I'm talking about, right, is this better than that? So what I said is I liken this discussion to something I've noticed in therapy, right? A therapist will adopt a new term and go all in on a therapy, right? And state that that's the solution that ails us all, right? Trying to say, well, the problem before is they didn't have, and again, what blows me away is they'll just rename the therapy and claim, oh, this is what we've been missing, right? The example I give is trauma-informed mindfulness or trauma-sensitive mindfulness. I find it funny, right? Because only one of them is, well, I'm just being bombastic, but the argument is, how are you supposed to know which one's the real? And imagine if they were to start playing with the synonyms to sensitive or informed or educated, right? We could have 100 different treatments when we should be looking for, all of the different protocols that help with trauma and have them hopefully in one place, so we don't have our vets being given pain meds to manage their trauma, right? Or as I said on the podcast earlier today, we don't have a therapist who thinks his plagiarized Jungian psychology is the solution to our enlightenment, right? Not just a problem to your suffering, your sadness, your trauma, your mindfulness, your remember. And he claims that he was a complex PTSD therapist, and I'm sorry, I have my great doubts, and I know I'm supposed to be positive. I'm not supposed to say negative things, but let's be honest, that's ridiculous. When a psychiatrist claims that his therapy is good enough to replace not only religion, but all other philosophies, all other therapies, but also is this like a path to enlightenment. Like, I'm sorry, even the Buddha didn't claim such a thing. He just claimed the path was a way to reduce your suffering, and maybe someday you might achieve a certain amount of peace, of shanti, moksha, right? Nirvana or enlightenment is something apart, right? And as I've said, how can anyone think that they're going to achieve enlightenment when they can't even sit and be still, let alone walk around in the world and be still, right? But I go further. I talk about van der Kolk's. This is Basil van der Kolk. He wrote the book The Body Keeps the Score. Highly recommend his book. But his problem is he goes all in on his rapid eye movement and doesn't explain that, well, this works for him and a lot of his patients, but won't admit the fact that, well, it's not going to work for every patient, right? And it might not be a complete healing for all patients. So you might just try his eye movement, and in the end, you might find you need to maybe add in internal family systems of Schwartz, right? His Gestalt, this idea, and it's beautiful because he's stolen it from Gestalt therapy. Gestalt is a German word. I've talked about it a lot. It means that the sum is greater than the parts, right? But what he means by this is he means we're just all a bunch of little parts. In fact, he, in his book, likens us to multiple personality disorders. He says that might just be a different reorganization or an extreme version of our own personality. I find that ridiculous because in his previous book, he explains that most of these parts are just a construct, right? This little child who was injured or insulted. These aren't actual personalities, or worse yet, teaching people to give agency to these individual parts. Because Gestalt therapy, you're supposed to sit across from an empty chair and interact with that part that might be giving you trouble. So immediately, this is a construct. This is not a real thing. And yet a therapist giving people the impression that, these parts are actually what we are. That's what Nietzsche explained. Gestalt says that we are a complex of all of these little parts or identities, but no single part could be identified as ourselves, right? And I go on and say that no, the solution is not one or some, but all of these therapies, all of these terms, all of these paths. And I say, we must try them on for size, since we are the arbiters of value, the deciders of meaning, the evaluators, the Schätzen in German, commonly known as treasure, but it's this idea of evaluating something for its value, for its meaning. What we treasure, what we create is what we value and what we treasure, what we put our passion into, right? It's this disconnect between East and West. When you have a Westerner look at a table, he just sees the table. When you see an Easterner look at the table, they think about how the table could be used. They picture the family sitting at the table having dinner. Well, I'll go one step further and ask, why don't we look at a table and see the creative energy and the physical labor that went into building and creating that table, hewing the logs, the growth of the trees. Arguably, that's this idea of grace or samadhi, or even a satori moment, to see through to the clarity of existence. Exactly that it is a table. It is also what the object would be used for. It is also wood, as a Swami in Vedanta would say. But it is also the labor and the passion and the creativity that went into the table itself, right? Because I say, what we decide to be our value or our meaning is what defines us, right? We are the one to embrace the path with devotion. Nobody else can follow a path with devotion, tread the path for us with devotion. Only we can do that. And that's the only thing missing in most religions. It's not a tenant. It's not even the people. It's the devotion and the commitment in the followers, in the practitioners. Right? As Jung said, all his patients with an unattributed malaise were cured when they adopted a religious view in life or of life. This idea of seeing the beauty of life, like the Transcendentals, Emerson and Whitman and Thoreau. The awe of Dasher Keltner, this idea that I tried to explain in the podcast, but I kind of left it. The fact that we can have two people stand at the edge of the Grand Canyon. One person will be meh, well, whatever. The other person could have a life-changing experience of awe or wonder. Right? So if this is true, it is not the religion. It is the religioso and the religio. Right? So it's not the religion that we need or the religion that's the problem. It is the follower of the religion, the religioso. And it is the path not being followed with devotion, which is religio. So when we bring religio and the religioso back into religion, the path we follow with devotion, then we're going to see benefits individually and maybe even benefits that might reverberate out into society, into our world itself. That might be our healing.